The success of turning a mature content IP into a company or a brand's commercialization isn't exactly the same thing, in my opinion. It's actually a sufficient, but not a necessary condition. Over the past decade, one big reason why content IPs have become mainstream is that, globally, the way consumers receive information has changed dramatically in the last 10 years.
In a way, they also see the ancient book economy as a reflection of the lipstick economy in today's era.
It's a lot like a star-making factory, because we can see that its growth is actually driven by one top IP after another, from Molly to now Lao.
Even though you might know that hyping up the price in a secondary market could actually shorten the IP's life cycle to some extent.
Having Hermès isn't a big deal, but you need to have a lab. It feels like this IP image has already become something in people's minds that could rival Hermès.
When it comes to content IPs, it's actually more of a way for people to label themselves. Precisely because there's no official storyline, it turns from a content story into a personal emotional vessel.
Do you two think this is just a flash in the pan? Or has our domestic IP really entered a golden age? Hello everyone, I'm Xiaoqi from Teaching Capital. Since the beginning of this year, I believe you've all noticed a phenomenon. Whether it's the explosive popularity of Mart or the hot sales of Labubu, you can really feel that domestic IPs are on fire. The term emotional value has become very valuable. We could also see that Mart stock has surged dramatically in the secondary market. So today, on this topic, we've invited two investors from Teaching Capital, Danny and Yunhao, to share their perspectives with everyone.
Hello everyone, I'm Danny from Teaching Capital. Hi everyone, I'm Yunhao, an investor at Teaching Capital. Right, so the first question I want to discuss with both of you is, do you have any personal feelings or experiences regarding the recent popularity of domestic IPs? Yeah, I think the most recent big hit was Neza 2 during the Chinese New Year movie season, with its box office success really exploding. There was a lot of news coverage at the time, reporting how it kept breaking historical box office records in China, including data from platforms like Maoyan. It even made it into the top 5 of the global box office rankings, with total box office revenue reaching nearly 15 or 16 billion yuan. Looking back a bit further, there was also a wave of popularity in the gaming world with titles like Black Myth, Wukong, and Genshin Impact. These are what we call major domestic IPs. Whether it's from news reports or our own daily experiences, we can see that these domestic IPs have really permeated everyone's everyday life in a significant way.
I'd like to follow up with a question. You mentioned the influence on daily life. Teaching Capital has done some consumer insights research. Are there any good examples from that research you could share?
Actually, when we were looking at many investment opportunities related to IP before, we did conduct some targeted consumer research. In these studies, we mainly divided things into two categories, because when it comes to IP, there are those with strong backing and those without. For IPs with strong backing, many consumers make purchases mainly because they like the content itself or certain characters in it. For example, with classic IPs like Pokemon, a lot of people are drawn to specific characters or the Pokemon themselves. On the other hand, for IPs without much content, people are usually attracted at first by the appearance or design. They feel that the look and style really match their own aesthetic preferences. So how should we understand this? I think a lot of times it's similar to how we follow celebrities. Some celebrities are known for their acting skills and have a lot of successful work to prove their talent. That's kind of like a content-driven IP. But nowadays, we also see a lot of what people call traffic stars, who don't necessarily have a lot of substance behind them, or maybe it's their looks that attract a lot of fans. Whether it's a male or female celebrity, this is more like an IP without much substance behind it. When you first notice them, it's not because of their acting skills or how many successful works they have. It's just that you think they're really good looking, whether they're a male or female star, and maybe they also have a great figure. So because of that, it boosts the celebrity's popularity. This is kind of like what we now call a contentless IP, the reason people are drawn to this IP at first sight.
How do you see this? Why is it that contentless IPs, like the traffic stars Hao just mentioned, can become popular?
I think contentless IPs are actually more of a form of self-labeling. Precisely because there is no official storyline, it shifts from being a narrative to becoming an emotional vessel for oneself. On the other hand, if an IP has content with a fixed character setting or a fixed story background, then all I can do is choose whether or not to accept that character setting, whether or not I like this particular character design. But in fact, I can't really project my own emotions, including my genuine feelings at this very moment, onto that character, nor can I combine them with my own experiences. Using that character as a foundation to make associations and to have a long-term process of evolution and iteration is actually more important, a long-term kind of feeling.
Let me add something, Danny, about the point you just made. I think, for example, when people see content IPs they're familiar with, like Capybara, that's actually a type of content IP without a set narrative. With Capybara, people often see it as representing a certain kind of feeling or vibe. Young people want to pursue a certain state of mind, one where they're unfazed by everything, a feeling that's pretty familiar. I think this isn't really about Capybara itself, but more about the emotional value you actively assign to it when you see it. It's similar to how some Disney theme parks have IPs that don't have a strong narrative foundation, like Lina Bell. I think that's the same kind of thing. Unlike traditional characters like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, which are cartoons that build up their IP, with Lina Bell, people see her and assign their own ideas to her image, thinking she's super cute, lively, smart, or maybe has a sharp expression. It's really more about consumers projecting their own emotions onto these contentless IPs. There are other contentless IPs too, like Hello Kitty or those bubble-like Molly figures. So, in fact, these IPs themselves don't really have a lot of expressions. From their perspective, when you're feeling down, you might see your own emotions reflected in them, and when you're happy, you'll see them as happy too. So they don't actually have many distinct expressions themselves. It's more that consumers project their own feelings onto these contentless IPs. As for the most popular content IPs, could we say, for example, which one is the most popular? In terms of scale and size, the most popular IP right now really is.
Regarding Lao, I've actually noticed something as well. I saw a report before, and the headline was pretty interesting. Having Hermès is no big deal, but you need to have a lab. It feels like this IP image has already become something in people's minds that can rival Hermès. So I'm curious, how does something like this happen? Well, I think this image itself is quite unique because Labubu, as we know, is the work of Hong Kong artist Kayou Lung. When he first created it, he actually blended elements of Norse mythology with local Hong Kong culture.
So in itself, it's an IP symbol with a certain international quality. Plus, its sharp-toothed design is really distinctive, so I think this IP naturally has a strong iconic character and the potential to go global. For many years, Pop Mart's ongoing operation of Labubu has actually been quite important. For example, the spin-off content and songs aren't just about localized operations. They're more about resonating emotionally with consumers around the world. And that's precisely because it doesn't have a specific cultural origin. So consumers everywhere can actually project their own preferences and emotional connections onto it. That's also why even the Thai princess likes Labubu. The affection from these people has really elevated Labubu to the higher level you just mentioned, putting it on par with some of the top brands. But on the other hand, we know that the luxury goods market today is facing the problem of weakened consumer spending. They also need to break into the younger user base. For luxury brands, the market itself is pretty much saturated, but young people actually represent a growth market.
So the collaboration between luxury brands and the Labubu IP is actually also about catering to younger consumers and looking for opportunities in the growth market. To add on, the explosive popularity of Labubu, in my opinion, is really the result of a combination of timing, location, and people. First of all, Labubu is a character from Pop Mart's The Monster series. The Monster series has actually been around for quite a while, but Labubu's real breakout moment came from a few key factors. One of them is that last year, a new category called Syrup Plushies became really popular. Before Labubu went viral, most of Pop Mart's products were still the traditional TPC blind boxes. Another key point is that last year Nisa, a member of the girl group Blackpink, really helped make Labubu popular. She posted a lot about herself and introduced Labubu on many of her social media platforms, including sharing lots of photos and interactions with Labubu. After that, it was kind of like when celebrities publicly carry Labubu around. It gives consumers a certain feeling, like owning Labubu is directly linked to keeping up with idol trends. For example, Lisa has a huge fan base, and by buying the same products as her, fans can imitate her lifestyle. In other words, through this kind of consumption, people build a sense of identity. For instance, Labubu used to be more of a niche collectible, but it has now become something else, a kind of mainstream social currency. So actually, we can see that on many secondhand trading platforms, the premium rate for Labubu products has already reached a very high level. I think one reason is that they have great collectible value. Another reason is that people basically treat them like luxury goods, like Hermès and so on.
Or like the charms people hang on their bags, so it actually has a certain variety of options. We've just talked a lot about the rise of content-free IPs and the explosive popularity of Labubu, but there's actually a question here. For most Chinese consumers, encountering the term IP has really only happened in the past couple of years. So I'm pretty curious, why is it that right now, at this particular point in time, IPs have become so popular in China?
Previously, we've talked with some entrepreneurs and business owners in the IP field, and I think there's a key point here. First, they mentioned why the blind box economy has become especially popular in the past year. In fact, to some extent, they see the blind box economy as a reflection of the lipstick economy in today's era. In the past, when people bought figurines or collectibles, they would usually cost several hundred, or even thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of yuan. But with a blind box economy, for example, a Mahutui badge or a standee might only cost a few dozen yuan. Even now, if you go buy a Pop Mart blind box, it's basically just 60 or 70 yuan to get one. Even if you buy a whole set, it's only a few hundred yuan. The general consensus nowadays is that the overall economic environment isn't as optimistic as it was 5 or 6 years ago, when everyone had high expectations for the future. In this kind of environment, people are more likely to focus their everyday spending on things that can bring them a bit of personal joy. For example, when you buy a Pop Mart product, or even something else, like a brick figure, the price per item really isn't that high. So actually, it can quickly satisfy a kind of self-rewarding behavior.
Yeah, I really agree with what Yunhao said. Actually, we believe that emotional value is more about an emotional experience. It's not just about value, it's more about the feeling of emotion itself. It brings you a brief or lasting sense of mental pleasure. Yunhua, you just mentioned the lipstick effect as well as the ice cream effect. We've actually looked into the history of the food and beverage industry in China quite a bit, and we've also made some global observations. In fact, the more the economy is in a downturn, the better ice cream sells, especially during financial crises. At those times, people find it hard to pay for luxury goods or expensive clothes and high-end restaurants, but they're more willing to buy an expensive ice cream to please themselves, both in terms of taste and emotionally. So I think that in today's China, under the current economic environment, young people are even more eager to break free from their daily work or life. They want to find other meanings and a sense of value in life.
And of course, going back to what we talked about at the very beginning regarding the popularity of domestic IPs, I think that's also closely related to the supply side. For example, many people have commented that Black Myth, Wukong is already a work that's very close to the level of major international games. In the past, there might not have been enough time, energy, or even willingness to achieve that. To invest in making a product like this. The same goes for Neza 2, actually. We can see that Neza 2, for example, has really well-crafted action scenes and some very refined systems. So, from the supply side, as the quality of your product improves, it's definitely going to attract more and more people. People are willing to pay for domestic IPs. Right.
You also mentioned Tang Dynasty plushies earlier. Speaking for myself, before you and I became popular step by step, I had no idea about this Tang Dynasty plushie phenomenon.
Because at first, most people's understanding of plush products was that they had to be concrete, like tied to a specific brand. Previously, when people thought of high-quality plush toys, the most recognized one was probably Jellycat. But Jellycat is purely a plush product. So what about plush toys with plastic faces? That is, the main part of the body is plush, but the face is still made of plastic. And in this situation, last year this category suddenly became a huge hit. There were definitely some unpredictable factors involved, even when we look at it now. If you talk to people in the industry and ask them what might become popular in 2025, they might look at things like this. Projects with really high crowdfunding amounts. For example, on Madian right now, the project with the highest crowdfunding is a BJ80, those ball-jointed dolls. So, this means that consumer preferences in this area are actually showing a trend. It's actually very hard to look at this from a forward-looking perspective. It's more about the current moment. When consumer preferences shift, you follow that shift and act accordingly, just going with the flow. I think, for example, last year in Shenzhen, there were a lot of manufacturers dealing with the Tang family conflict, and some of them expanded overseas to Southeast Asia. Even domestically, some of the sales teams were able to achieve, well, on the smaller side, sales of 500 to 600 million yuan, and on the larger side, even up to 2 billion yuan in sales volume. But actually, if you really talk to them, like if you go back to 2023 and ask them whether the Tengyomeo trend would blow up a year later, they couldn't really give you a very definite answer either.
So actually, the explosive popularity of a certain category has a degree of randomness to it.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what we talked about before with domestic IPs, like Genshin Impact. Before Genshin came out, most domestic games were focused on things like casual games or those more like the legend genre. But after Genshin launched, a lot of companies started to realize the potential of combining open-world gameplay with RPG elements. Combining it with anime style or second dimension elements has big commercial potential. Everyone saw Labubu's success and the syrupy plush toy category, and in Southeast Asia and the domestic market, it resonated and created this trend. People saw consumers had strong demand for these brands, so everyone started getting into it.
From an investor's perspective, we actually believe that Sugar Cat plush toys have opened up a huge market for IP products. People used to think that IP-related items, like the earliest trading cards or standees, were pretty limited in terms of product variety. Pop Mart, actually, has really expanded and iterated on these plastic figurine products, taking them much further than before. Then gradually, we started seeing long-focused plush toys. This new generation of plush toys, right? Different materials or different forms, even in small sizes and all kinds of shapes, including large dolls and even bird-like materials. These extended forms have really enriched the variety a lot.
In fact, it's through one category innovation after another that the entire supply side has become more prosperous. That's one way to look at it.
As the supply side becomes more vibrant, the different forms on the demand side can also match the preferences of different consumers, right? For example, nowadays, a lot of people are combining all kinds of toys with AI for interactive experiences. Of course, I think that's another topic altogether, but I do believe that this kind of multidimensional matching between supply and demand will further expand the market size of the industry.
Just now, we talked about, after listening to quite a bit about Pop Mart, I get the feeling that Pop Mart is a bit like a star-making factory, because we can see that its growth is actually driven by one top-tier IP after another, from Molly to the current Lao.
Whether they're looking at Pop Mart or other IP-based companies might question.
In other words, people wonder if your company or your brand will fall into a fashion race. But for a company, if I'm an agency or a star-making factory, I'm definitely better equipped to handle the fashion race than if I were just a single celebrity.
This actually goes back to my analogy of IPLS content IPs being like celebrities. For these kinds of brands, since they're not based on a real person's image, the biggest advantage is that they avoid the risk of a scandal. We know that in the past, a lot of traffic-driven or good-looking celebrities have had incidents that cause fans to lose interest or even turn away. For example, take Molly from Pop Mart, as well as their SP, their demo, and the one that's been really popular lately. None of them are real people, so there's no risk of a scandal. And actually, from the perspective of how the company manages these IPs, it really is something that requires long-term investment and nurturing. If we look at Molly, for example, it was launched in 2016, and by now, it's probably gone through nearly 50 or 60 product iterations, so actually, they have to keep updating every year. For example, Pop Mart also launched the Mega Series, which is positioned at a very high level. The idea is to keep engaging the core users who buy Molly, and to keep operating this IP. Every year, like in 2024, they might spend $600 million on marketing to ensure that these IPs are always being promoted with their original intent and maintaining strong connections with consumers.
Right, as you just mentioned, for companies like Pop Mart that create original IPs, they have to keep investing money to nurture their own IPs. If we compare it to something like a talent farm, it's like having a selection process to pick out the potential stars that need to be developed further, and then managing and promoting them afterwards.
Yes, actually, the founder of Pop Mart, Wang Ming, has mentioned in many interviews that when he's looking to discover a new artist IP, the artist first needs to be someone who is already highly recognized within a niche group of trendsetters. And secondly, he uses his own commercial operation skills to bring this niche IP to his own target consumer base, because right now Pop Mart has around 40 to 50 million registered users. So actually, its audience is already very broad. From Pop Mart's perspective, I think it's just like with celebrities. For example, if you're a celebrity known for your looks, you also need to constantly get the new roles in TV dramas or movies, and maybe even create some hype, like rumors or scandals, or have them appear in certain. The main thing is to keep a high level of buzz on media platforms. Actually, I think this is just like how they keep launching new product lines for these IPs, doing collaborations, creating new types of pop-up stores, and organizing various events. I think it's all the same approach.
Yeah, you basically have to make sure it always stays really popular. When it comes to content IP, we can simply understand it as a way of operating original IP. Actually, we've seen a lot of examples, like I'm talking about IPs that everyone knows, such as Pokemon, Doraemon, or Ultraman. Even today, these kinds of IPs have found new ways to stay relevant.
These IPs, like number one, have also achieved significant business growth.
Actually, we think that with these older IPs, it's probably because they already have a well-established set of content to support them. For example, when Ultraman was first introduced to China, honestly, I think everyone knew about it as a kid, like Ultraman Tiga, which was brought in during the 1990s. So its audience is already pretty clear, probably mainly elementary and middle school students, and among them, boys are the main target audience. So the question is, how do you effectively monetize the Ultraman IP? Well, trading cards, for example, and also Blue, after getting the Ultraman license from the new card dealership, went on to create financial products. This actually did a great job of commercializing and monetizing the Ultraman IP. What I mean is, previously, with the figurines, Ultraman didn't really break out among elementary and middle school students, probably because the price per item was pretty high. Most students just can't afford to buy such expensive products with their own pocket money. But with trading cards, the entry price is much lower, so basically, after class, elementary and middle school students can use their own allowance to buy them. With just a little money, I can go next door, like to a stationery store, and buy a pack of cards. So for them, their ability to pay is much stronger, and it's not such a big burden. Another thing is that when it comes to how Kayou operates, especially now that it's really popular, whether it's Bali cards or Ultraman cards, the first thing is that the boss actually used to run a printing factory. So Kayou even invested in its own factory, which means the quality of the printed cards is really excellent. So this year, when you see their cards for the first time, you might think they look really beautiful. Secondly, they actually have a very strict grading system. For example, there have been news reports before about a My Little Pony card, where its price on the secondary market could be speculated up to tens of thousands or even over 100,000 yuan. In this situation, the cards have a certain level of scarcity, or you could say, in their mini programs, they've basically become a kind of hard currency for social interactions. That's why, among groups like elementary and middle school students, whether it's Ultraman cards or My Little Pony cards, they can quickly become really popular and go viral.
We just mentioned the whole card thing, but actually, this isn't something new. Playing with cards. Back when we, the post-90s generation, were in elementary school, people were already playing with cards. So why didn't a company like Card5 emerge back then? But now it has.
Yes, I think this means that the success of a mature content IP being commercialized by a company or brand is not necessarily a direct equivalent. Actually, I don't think it's a direct equivalence. It's more like a sufficient but not necessary condition. Having a mature, well-known IP that everyone is familiar with from childhood, a shared recognition and memory, serves as a foundation for success, or for your company. It's a solid foundation for your company to develop further, but whether you can truly achieve commercial success actually depends on your ability to commercialize that IP, right? That includes what kind of commercialization path you choose and how you communicate with consumers. Like we mentioned earlier, even if you get the Ultraman license and make a figurine, for example, but a high-priced brand might not succeed in China. On the other hand, a price point that most people can accept could lead to huge commercial success. I think once you have the IP, what's even more important is how you match that IP with the needs of the market. After achieving a match, how do I continue with sustained commercial promotion?
For example, back when we were kids, we used to play with those trading cards, like the Three Kingdoms cards or water margin cards. At that time, there really wasn't a company with a mature and well-developed operating system to handle this. But now, why is it that a company like Kayou has such high profit margins and is even about to go public, right? Why do companies like Kayou exist? It's because they have mastered a mature and systematic approach.
Right, it really comes down to business capability. Business capability isn't just about your product or how your IP and product are combined. It's still fundamentally about the product itself. But beyond product capability, we know that a successful company also needs strong channel capabilities. Furthermore, you also need supply chain capabilities. Companies like Kayou have strong advantages and economies of scale in production.
Could you use the My Little Pony cards that Kayou made as an example to explain this to us? How did you work with this kind of IP?
Right, we actually touched on this a bit earlier. I think there are a few key points here. First, My Little Pony's card designs are indeed very exquisite.
I think if you've ever bought them yourself, or if you're a fan of My Little Pony cards, you'll definitely have a pretty deep understanding of this. Another thing is that Kayou set up a very strict card grading system for them. The most common ones are what everyone calls N cards, and the rarest ones are the S1 cards. So there are glitter cards, and what else? There are also 40th anniversary limited exchange cards. It's like when we were kids and ate little raccoon snacks, and they gave out water margin cards. Everyone naturally had a collector's mindset. When you add a certain level of rarity to that collectability, it really makes people want to buy these things even more. Everyone hopes to pull a really fresh or unique style, so they can show off to their friends or within their social circles that they have something truly rare. I think this is also related to the current sales channels. For example, last year, Kayou was mainly on Douyin. Opening more card packs has also become a really effective way to boost sales. Back when we were kids eating little raccoon snacks, platforms like Douyin didn't even exist yet. Mobile internet wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. But now, with platforms like Douyin China, since Douyin is a nationwide platform, it's a whole different story. So in this situation, it actually allows their live streams of card pack openings to reach a lot more consumers. Another thing that many people have been paying attention to is, why, even though you know the prices are being hiked up so much in the secondary market, you still go along with it, even though it might shorten the cycle to some extent. The life cycle of the IP, right?
Wait, is that really the case?
I think there are different perspectives on this. From our point of view, if you can't really control the market or manage the price premium, then it's actually not that easy to ensure the long-term development of your IP's life cycle.
If the traffic gets excessively exposed in a short period of time, it gets used up really quickly.
Yes, I think that's a good way to understand it.
Or perhaps it's the excessive commercialization that comes from overexposure.
Because I just looked up My Little Pony. Earlier, we mentioned that it has a very strict tiered system, right? It seems like there are as many as 26 types.
Right? There are indeed 26 types, which are the SC cards, and maybe there's a new SC card, so those might be the two rarest ones.
So, for example, for the card you just mentioned that's the rarest, what are the odds that I could actually pull one?
The probability of pulling a C card is 1 in 216, which is roughly less than 0.5%. For Pop Mart blind boxes, the probability of getting a hidden edition is usually 1 in 144. From what I remember, it's 1 in 144, but the odds for hidden editions can vary between different series. For Xingtuan, the probability is 1 in 180, and for small hidden editions, it's 1 in 36.
For example, with these SC cards from My Little Pony, do they have a secondary market price?
Because Bali has released a lot of codes, like for their card packs. For instance, the cheaper ones are the shadow packs, so maybe now.
The most common on the market is the ignored BMW. Different card packs have different premiums on the secondary market. News reports said at peak, a single card could reach tens of thousands or even over 100,000 yuan.
Wow, just one card costs over 100,000.
Yeah.
Are elementary students paying for this?
Actually, it's like the saying, the wool comes from the pig's back in the end. It's all coming from the parents' wallet.
But the price of an ordinary SC card is generally around 140 to 150 yuan.
Oh, and you bought yours directly from a scalper too, right?
Right.
So actually, even the original price has been marked up several times. So, is it fair to say that this is usually the case? We can actually use the premium multiplier of an IP on the secondary market to estimate how much return that IP brings.
There's a correlation. The more popular the IP, the higher its secondary market price. For example, My Little Pony once sold for a sky-high 250,000 yuan.
Scalpers are actually an indispensable part of the chain as well.
That's right. Scalpers really can help drive up the premium in the secondary market. A lot of people aren't buying because they want to collect or because they think the card looks good. It's purely a speculative move. What they do is buy in, then resell at a higher price. The scalper group really does boost the circulation of cards or other IP-related products in the secondary market. You could say that having these scalpers around actually helps with that.
Yeah, I saw an interesting point about this. It said that when I buy this kind of IP product, since it has value in the secondary market, I'm not just making a purchase. I might also feel more justified about it in my mind.
It's like I'm investing. Some people really do actually think of it in that particular way.
I think it actually depends on what kind of thing you're buying. If you look at it more broadly, this is just one form of IP merchandise. Trading cards are actually the least interactive among them. Above that, You have things like PVC blind boxes, and then even higher up, there are figures and models. So, if the playability is pretty low, then for a lot of people, it's either purely for collecting or nothing at all. Or you could say that when you buy it, it's really more of an investment behavior. You see it as a way to manage your money or as an investment.
But I think the so-called investment here, I'm putting that in quotes, is actually not so much about absolute investment returns, but more about fulfilling certain psychological needs for a sense of achievement. I think it has a certain emotional value or provides an emotional experience. For example, we often go to Pop Mart to buy blind boxes. In a set, there are about 12 different figures, and of course, there are usually 3 that we really want to get, right? There are even lots of guides online teaching you how to get the hidden editions or tips for getting the ones you like, right? So when you actually get the one you want, it feels like you spent the same amount of money, but you feel like you've won. But if you get one you don't like, I might feel like I lost outright, or I might have to keep spending money until I finally get the one I want. Another thing is, if you look at the secondary market, each of the 12 figures in a set actually has its own price. For example, if you check some secondary market platforms, you'll notice that some figures are more expensive than their original price, while others are cheaper. So when the one I like also happens to be one of the higher priced ones, I feel like my taste is spot on, like I've made a good deal, or that my preferences match the market's.
Just now, we talked about 2 relatively new companies. One is Pop Mart, and the other is Kayou. Actually, we've also noticed a new trend. Companies like Miniso, for example, were originally seen or thought of as tin-yuan variety stores. But in recent years, we've seen that Miniso has actually been selling more and more things like plush toys and products related to various IPs. And these products are often really popular overseas, including those that Miniso has developed in-house.
Miniso, which has incubated its own IP and even has plans to go public. So how should we understand this? How does an established channel brand use IP to find a second growth curve?
After all, Miniso was founded back in 2013, and at first, everyone knew them for selling general merchandise. I believe that investors in the primary market, starting from around 2016 or 2017, have actually seen several rounds of this, whether in terms of awareness or in the secondary market. Miniso also noticed changes in its overall product structure. In fact, as early as 2016, they started to sign some IP deals and began making general merchandise with IP attributes. But it was only later that Miniso truly established IP as the company's core strategy. From what I understand, it was around 2022 or 2023 that they gradually made IP-driven products the biggest strategic focus for Miniso. That's also something about Miniso. The founder, after years of insight into the Chinese economy and working within the general merchandise category, was always looking for ways to differentiate and find a breakthrough. In the end, he realized that IP could be the key to breaking through in this industry.
Yeah, I remember I once listened to an interview with Fu, and he mentioned something. He said that when it comes to existing global IPs with content, there are basically none that Miniso can't secure. That's right. Actually, I'm pretty curious too. For example, when it comes to IP licensing, Miniso claims there's no IP they can't get. But if we look at it from the perspective of the upstream IP holders, or let's say from any angle, who do they usually license their IP to? What are the conditions involved here?
I think the reason why Miniso can now say there's no IP they can't get mainly comes down to their global network of 7 or 8,000 stores. In China, they have about 4,000 stores, and overseas, they have nearly 4,000 as well. So, if you want to reach the largest number of consumers worldwide, you have to work with Miniso. And now, they've already defined themselves as the world's #1 IP design and retail group, and they really do have the world's largest IP-driven retail network in terms of store count. Yeah, so partnering with Miniso is, in my opinion, a perfect fit, and as we know, Miniso is also very strong in the domestic market. IP-related products now account for 30% of sales in their domestic stores, and internationally, that figure is already between 40% and 50%. In fact, for Miniso's international stores, IP-based products make up almost half of their offerings. So, for the upstream IP holders, on one hand, they hope that their IP can reach the widest possible audience through you. At the same time, you also need to have comprehensive IP design capabilities. It's not just about giving you an IP, and you can only make a cup or just a toy. When you work with Miniso, whether it's trendy collectibles or general merchandise, they can offer a complete product line. Because they have 7 or 8,000 stores worldwide, they can also spread out the costs. That's how they can spread out the cost of IP licensing fees. So we've seen that when some of the world's top IPs become available, Miniso can spend tens of millions, or even over 100 million, to sign a deal for that IP.
But for a startup channel or an ordinary channel, they actually don't have the financial capability to compete with Miniso.
So, if we divide the entire IP economy into upstream, midstream, and downstream segments, Miniso is basically positioned somewhere between the midstream and downstream.
Yes, and now they're also starting to build up their own upstream resources, so they're also working on developing some original IPs.
You could say that Pop Mart covers all three segments, upstream, midstream, and downstream. In fact, Kayou is also positioned between midstream and downstream in China. They only focus on design and sales.
It's actually equivalent to handling IP signing, IP design, and IP sales channels all by themselves.
And in their own sales channels, they don't sell third-party IPs either. It's all vertically integrated, right? But when it comes to Miniso, it's actually an open channel. They have their own self-developed IPs, licensed IPs, and even some third-party IPs. So it's more like a channel-focused company, kind of like the Android system.
From what we've just learned about the company, Miniso is probably more focused on downstream channels. As for PopMart, aside from outsourcing production to OEMs for the upstream, they basically shifted toward operating the entire industry chain themselves, because they can add their own IPs, and the channels they enter are all their own, maybe 400 or 500 retail stores and over 2,000 integrated stores. As for Kayou, they might have built their own factory, but when it comes to downstream channels, they mostly rely on distributors. They maintain a relatively large business system, and actually each company's approach or choice is a bit different. If we look at it in terms of profit distribution, it's really hard to say which stage in the whole process has the highest profit margin. I don't think you can just point to one and say that's where the most profit is. But if we look at the results, there are a few points to consider. First, if you build your own factory, you can reduce some of your production costs. So in this area, Kayou has a pretty good advantage. And then, if you're operating across the entire industry chain, for example, like PopMart, where my retail stores sell directly to end consumers, this can also help increase your profit margins to some extent.
For example, if I use the trading card industry as an example, maybe a single card costs me less than 1 yuan, but in the store, I can sell it for 10 yuan. So from 1 yuan to 10 yuan, who is taking the biggest share of that difference?
Let's use an example. Say a pack of cards sells for 10 yuan. The retail store at the end might get 4 yuan out of that 10. The distributor might get about 90 cents. The card brand might get around 3.5 yuan, roughly at that level. Upstream, there are material costs, licensing fees paid to the copyright holders, and maybe some other cost as well.
So overall, what's the gross profit margin for the card brands? It's probably around 60 to 70%, if I remember correctly. Anyway, since they recently updated their prospectus in 2024, the approved gross profit margin is about 67%. Over the past few years, the gross margin has basically stayed stable at around 67 to 68%, just under 70%. In the whole IP economy, this puts them in a pretty high tier. Even though they have to pay a lot in licensing fees to the upstream IP holders, the gross profit they end up with is still very high.
Right?
Earlier, you mentioned things like IP or content IP and differences between original and established IPs. I have a question. If Labubu becomes popular, can I make something similar afterwards?
So actually, this really depends on how well each product or brand naturally fits with a certain strategy. For instance, we've seen that Kayou previously tried to promote its own original IP called Kayou 3 Kingdoms, but actually, it's current. Market performance? It probably never really met the company's initial expectations. The card game category itself isn't very playable, and most of what they do is based on licensing content IPs. It's really difficult for them to develop their own original IPs for card games. In fact, we rarely see companies willing to invest a lot of money into this. For example, take PopMart. Actually, if you look at PopMart, you'll see that they've expanded horizontally into a wide variety of categories. So, this includes things like building blocks, BJDs, and maybe some big dolls or hanging card brands. They've expanded into a lot of different areas. But actually, they haven't touched the card game category at all. The first reason is that PopMart's target audience tends to be people between 25 and 35 years old, maybe even up to 40. About 60% to 70% of their users are mainly women.
Now, when it comes to trading cards, for example, the core users of Kayou cards are mostly students. Ultraman cards are basically bought by boys, while My Little Pony cards are probably more popular with girls. So, there are actually some key differences among the core consumers for each of these products.
So looking at it from these points, if you ask whether Pop Mart will compete in the trading card category in the future, I think it's very unlikely. This is actually quite interesting. Different product formats really target different audiences. Of course, even though Pop Mart has its own IP, today it has also become relatively well known among young people. And since it's an IP that people really like, under these circumstances, it's actually possible for them to develop card-type products as well. For example, if you look at Pop Mart's new video brand, it actually incorporates some of Pop Mart's core IP characters. But accessories are also high-ticket items, and compared to their previous 69 yuan blind boxes, I think they're probably targeting the same middle-class demographic, people with a certain level of disposable income. But honestly, when it comes to cards, the main audience is still those elementary and middle school students, and their average spending is pretty low, just a few bucks. So it really comes down to whether they can do it, and whether they actually want to. In theory, they could definitely make trading cards, but for them, their current average transaction value is already quite high. When the average order value reaches tens or even hundreds of yuan, of course, they want to move toward categories with higher added value or higher average spending. The original platform is just more efficient for them. But actually, if we look at brands like Miniso, which already have a lot of their own channels, it's a different story.
They haven't said they want to make their own trading cards either. Their challenges are pretty much the same. Maybe making trading cards isn't as simple as we imagine. It's not just about getting a character image, changing its color or design, and printing it on a card.
Just slow down a bit, that's fine. To touch on this point, right now in the entire Chinese trading card market, Kayou is basically the dominant player, way ahead of everyone else. Below them, there are some trading card companies with annual sales under 1 billion yuan. People have realized that this actually has a lot to do with the IP you own. For example, this year Neza 2 has been especially popular, and a lot of companies have turned Neza 2 into trading cards. There are others as well who have done the same. Then, there are some anime-based games from before, and their core revenue might actually lean more toward the 18 to 25 age group. So if a trading card company turns these kinds of IPs into products, their target consumers would probably be between 18 and 25 years old. Earlier you mentioned this current trend of having original IPs, and in theory, I can expand infinitely and cover all sorts of things with the IP. So, theoretically, a lot of people might want to turn Disney's IP into trading cards this year. But actually, when it comes to, say, turning Tencent's IP into trading cards, whether they can really achieve good sales conversion is something people have different opinions about. Some people might think, for example, that Disney's IP can work because it has such a huge user base, and after you turn it into trading cards, a lot of people are willing to pay extra for that IP. But there are also people who think that Disney's IPs, like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and other official Disney characters, might not really be suitable for turning into trading cards. That's because, for example, people are more likely to go to Disneyland and buy plush toys or figurines, things like that, but they wouldn't really want to buy a set of collectible cards. So, for example, if you look at it from Pop Mart's perspective, some of their hottest IPs like Molly, and also things like. Personally, I think there's no need for them to get into the trading card business, because right now, they have a lot of room to expand horizontally.
Including things like the ones Molly released before, and maybe expanding in other ways too, but I really don't think there's any need for them to get into trading cards. Actually, I think it's about compatibility, whether this IP is suitable for making trading cards or soft vinyl figures. You can see that Labubu was actually the first to make these soft vinyl, larger size products, but Molly didn't really do that. I think that's also related to the image of the IP itself, right? For example, making a bigger version doesn't necessarily make it cuter than the smaller one, or maybe it's just not suited for a wider variety of materials. We're just saying that this really needs a professional evaluation, right? And from another perspective, do you really need to rush into commercializing and monetizing it so quickly, right? Or when should I actually do it, right? In theory, when everyone is really passionate about and loves this IP, at that time, if you release a lot of merchandise, people will probably buy it all. But if you overdevelop products, you'll end up diluting people's affection for your IP. I think the core thing for an IP, whether it's a design team or a brand, is that you really need to consider whether creating a new product will actually enrich the meaning of your IP and increase user engagement, rather than just diluting the love your users have for it. I think that's the key point, because from the consumer's perspective, this is also something they care about. They feel like you're taking advantage of them, right? Or that you're trying to cash in on them too quickly. In fact, people's love for an IP usually doesn't have any practical use. It's more about emotional value, which is a bit different. For example, fans might think Wani Boss should be acting in movies, but if he suddenly starts doing short dramas just to make money off of us, that affection could be used up quickly. Or take the example of celebrities opening restaurants. At first, their fans might line up, and there's a quick surge in purchases and monetization. But as we've seen, a lot of these celebrity restaurants end up having food safety issues, or sometimes the business just shuts down and disappears.
These incidents, well, they actually have a pretty negative impact on the celebrity's reputation and public image. This is quite interesting. If we look at it from the perspective of star making, you can really see a lot of similarities with IPs. I'm thinking, is the problem that our approach to managing IPs has already become so detailed? For example, you mentioned earlier that maybe the working class persona is more suitable for syrup brands. Have we really refined things to that level? Because I have. I saw some data saying that for something like Hello Kitty, in 1 year there could be as many as 50,000 different Hello Kitty products being sold worldwide. That's actually a staggering number. Hello Kitty is literally everywhere, in all kinds of forms. But it seems like people don't really do it that way anymore. Or maybe now there's a more defined plan. I think there's a much stronger sense of planning when it comes to IP management these days. I feel like the reason why the Pop Mart system might be more mature and stable is because they have full control over their IPs. So when it comes to planning for the IP or for the products, they can control the entire pace.
It's actually pretty clear. I might have a main storyline for development, and my goal is really to make sure my IP has a longer life cycle, a higher level of user affection, and a stronger emotional connection. So I'll develop products that are specifically suited to the characteristics of the IP. On the other hand, if I'm just an IP that's only licensed out, right? Maybe I'm a parent company and I own the license for, say, an Ultraman IP, but I give that license to 20 different distributors or design companies, just letting them develop whatever products they want. That's definitely going to cause a lot of chaos in a short period of time.
Right. In the end, it's the IP itself that gets hurt. We've seen that, whether it was in the past or now, in the US, for example, with Marvel and Disney, or later on with those classic character IPs from Japan. They mostly use this kind of licensing model. You could say that, starting from Payama Road, we already have a brand new kind of operating mechanism. In theory, my relationship with the artist might also be a licensing contract, but maybe I'm doing a lot more work on top of that. Actually, there's another question I want to bring up. We're seeing that the boundaries of content-free IPs are getting more and more blurred. Does this mean that if I want to create my own IP now, I might have a higher ceiling and more opportunities than before? I think that in the past 10 years, content-free IPs have become mainstream, or at least they've become a new area of growth or a new trend.
The main reason is that, over the past 10 years, the way consumers receive information globally has changed a lot compared to the previous decade or even the last 20 years. Especially in China, I think whether it's us or the new generation of young people, the way we receive information is becoming more and more fragmented, right? People are probably scrolling through Douyin or Xiaohongshu, right? On social media, we're actually getting information in a much more fragmented way. In fact, most content IPs nowadays are more like fast food, right? They rely on their external image, some emotional connections, or emotional projection, right? But if you look at the past 20 years, whether it's Marvel or Harry Potter or Disney, those content-rich IPs, back then, I remember when we were kids, we were actually willing to spend time reading the original Harry Potter books, right? We would watch the Harry Potter movies over and over again, step by step. So those content-driven IPs were probably your main source of entertainment throughout your childhood, whether it was from reading or from your leisure time. But now, people aren't really willing to spend that much time reading or immersing themselves in a particular story or content universe.
Yeah, nowadays, even when you watch a movie, you might watch it at double speed just to get through it quickly and experience those emotional highs as fast as possible. So, we kind of feel that we can put Helmut in the same category as those companies. Whether it's through Wanda's innovation, category innovation, or their unique operational mechanisms, they've opened up a path for the entire domestic IP economy. We're definitely going to see more and more new companies emerging in the future, and actually, you can already see that the popular IPs now aren't just Kwangbon and this one company.
Right. So could you both share, based on our observations, what other new companies are out there? Actually, besides Helmut, we've noticed that in the current Helmut category, most of the products still need Well, within this track, if we look at some of the external sales data, there are actually a lot of new companies emerging. This includes companies like Xu and Jiaodujiashu, Finding Unicorns, and maybe even Wantoys. And then there are some that have been pretty popular recently, like Dora Zola and those IPs. There are always new companies popping up, and they're incubating their own IPs. How do I see it? I think it's kind of like the content industry. It's always going to be a field where 100 flowers bloom. It's impossible for just one company to dominate everything. So actually, if you map content onto the IP field, it's definitely also a case where 100 flowers bloom, not a situation where one company dominates and keeps that position forever. So you think there are still opportunities for newcomers, right? But as for these opportunities for newcomers, I think it really depends on a lot of factors. Right now, we can see that Pop Mart's user base in China is actually far ahead of all other products, so its brand recognition is extremely high. It has actually already reached a lot of users who are quite far removed from the traditional fan circles. So, for example, if you look at other companies, the difference in user numbers between them and Pop Mart is still very significant. Even if they launch a character with excellent design and a well-developed backstory, their user base might still be limited to their own circle, and it's hard for them to break out of that. Another point is that, aside from Pop Mart, most of these companies don't really take the same approach. They don't handle offline operations themselves. Instead, they usually rely on distributors or partner with key accounts like Miniso, Top Toy, or XLPKV for collaborations. But when you work with these other channels, you lose control over your own shelf space. Because the amount of shelf space you get, how your products are displayed, and the overall setup, all of that is determined by the channel partner. They decide the ratio between their own brands and third-party brands. So actually, you can't really control it very well, because, as we often say, an IP needs to be nurtured. For example, if I have an IP that I believe in, let's say, like Pop Mart, I can keep displaying that IP in my own stores as long as I want. But if you're working with third-party key account channels, for example, if the sales performance of a new product is poor in the first 3 months after its launch, they'll immediately pull your product off the shelves. They won't give you enough time to let your new product get exposure. So, for the current second-tier and third-tier players, if they want to break through with a single IP, kind of like what Miniso did.
Miniso might be working with more established IPs, while Pop Mart collaborates more with upstream artists, right? On one hand, they have access to artist resources, and on the other, they have the largest user base. So when there are some really good artists globally, they can sign them right away. These artists can then be integrated into their network or turned into products. Then they can quickly distribute these products through their global channels. And precisely because of their strong channel and user base, these upstream artists are definitely more inclined to work with Pop Mart. So when it comes to collaboration, at a certain stage, it definitely has the advantage of platform scale effects, right? But in the long run, the content industry is bound to be a place where 100 flowers bloom. For example, we're seeing some new companies making blind box products, and they might have their own content development mechanisms, nurturing their own talent. Designers or develop their own content platforms, right? Creativity definitely won't be limited to just a few people. So I think, in the long run, the real opportunity is about who can come up with better ideas and create IP characters that have emotional interaction with users. If someone creates something more appealing, I could also use Miniso's channels or WorkToy's channels to share my product. Right, in the end, it still comes down to whether you have good ideas and strong product images.
Earlier, we also talked about how the entire IP economy can be divided into the upstream IP image creators or producers, the midstream commercialization capabilities, and the downstream channel capabilities, looking at it from this upstream, midstream, and downstream perspective. Is there a new opportunity at every stage? There are opportunities at each stage, but we believe there are actually 2 core capabilities here.
The first core capability is actually IP research and design. That is, how to create great ideas and strong IP images. Yeah, I think this is also a core capability. Right? Whether you're working with upstream licensors to co-develop and design products, developing products on your own, or as a designer getting the best creative ideas, right? For a company, this is really a key capability, isn't it? And I think the second capability comes after commercialization. The next capability is about channels. Once I have a good IP product, how do I quickly reach consumers, right? I could be like Pop Mart, using my own stores to build a direct connection with consumers, or like Miniso or Top 10, leveraging an established sales network with thousands of stores to distribute my products. I could even use online models, like selling my Superplay products directly to consumers through platforms such as Douyin or Tmall. So, I think these two capabilities are actually extremely important in today's IP landscape. How do I develop great IP? And how do I quickly reach my consumers?
Finally, coming back to the question we started with, about the phenomenon of domestic IPs becoming more and more popular, do you both think this is just a flash in the pan, or has our domestic IP really entered a golden age? From a macro perspective, if we look at Japan's experience under the backdrop of an overall economic slowdown, an aging population, and declining birth rates in society.
As for the content industry, it has continued to maintain a growth rate far higher than that of GDP. Specifically, since the 1990s, after Japan's economic bubble burst and both population growth and GDP growth rates began to decline sharply, the domestic demand for the anime industry in Japan has actually remained very strong. Japan's domestic IP capabilities have also been continuously strengthening some of the classic works that are well known worldwide. For example, Slam Dunk was released in 1990, Detective Conan came out in 1994, and then there are titles like Bakuso Kyudai Let's and Go, Initial D, and Pokemon, all of which were released between 1994 and 1996. These were all released during that period. So, in a way, China is currently facing macro-environmental changes similar to those Japan experienced. Previously, people often looked to Japanese consumer trends as a benchmark for China. And now, with the trend towards smaller household sizes becoming more pronounced, and as intergenerational relationships are being redefined, we believe that in the future, more and more young people will seek comfort and solace from IP content.
Just now, Yunhao mentioned that young people seek comfort from IP content. In fact, they treat IP as a kind of emotional outlet for themselves. To add to that, from the perspective of supply and demand, young consumers are clearly more willing to pay for emotional value and personal interests. Simply put, with lowered expectations for the future and a shrinking flow of information, young people have realized that it's better to spend money on things that make them happy. In the past, when my income was better, I could spend tens of thousands of yuan on a designer bag and feel happy for a week. But now, maybe I'll just spend 60 or 70 yuan on a blind box. That can also make me happy for a whole day, right? In fact, the marginal benefit of the happiness it brings is actually greater. Right now, there are about 100 million general ACG, anime, comics, and games fans in China, and Pop Mart has nearly 50 million registered users domestically. So actually, in China, there is already a huge base of consumer users. From the supply side, whether it's content IP or character IP, there are already plenty of successful examples in China. In the animation field, 320 million Bilibili users are watching Chinese animation works. The rise of Chinese animation has also been a widely discussed topic in recent years. In the film and television sector, 2 NESA movies alone have reached a box office of 18 billion yuan, and other outstanding works like Chang'an have also brought in several billion at the box office. In the gaming sector, we have even more original Chinese game brands, such as Genshin Impact. Black Myth. Wukong is not only a huge hit in China, but it can also serve as a vehicle for cultural export to fans around the world, right? It's an original Chinese creation that has become popular both domestically and throughout Southeast Asia, and it's even won over many Western celebrities. Stars like Lisa and Rihanna have promoted it on their own initiative, which is really impressive. You know, people used to have certain expectations about Chinese domestic IPs, but looking at it from another perspective, maybe this is exactly why homegrown IPs can break through different cultural barriers and win fans all over the world. So we believe that the domestic IP economy isn't just a flash in the pan. It's truly entering a golden age. We'll be sharing more about the IP economy in the future, and we hope everyone will interact with us in the comments section.